had a perfectly normal childhood. Well, except for the bomb threats in the cradle. Dad was a union organizer. I also had a perfectly ordinary middle sister, except for the year she became a homicidal maniac and tried to murder our father. She crept up behind him as he stood at the top of a steep set of stairs, then beat him behind the knees. Dad, being a union leader, fortunately was nippy on his pins and escaped death. He was, understandably, a trifle cross and very confused, 3-year-old homicidal maniacs being rare, so Mom undertook the investigation. Sweetheart, Wendy, did you just try to murder Daddy? Yes. Oh, why? So he can go to heaven and bring Grandma, who had just died, back. Now, Dad, Ed Lawson, was a perfectly ordinary guy who was at the Million Man March on Washington and brought Martin Luther King a check from the Teamsters. He was the only white man on the dais, and a waggish minister said, "Well, Mr. Lawson, that's a whole heap of angry Negroes. I hope your tie is a clip-on." Dad replied, "I'm a union leader. My tie is always a clip-on." Now, Mom was a perfectly ordinary 50s housewife who saved a lake. She stayed home to raise 3 kids, then later became a Burnaby Parks commissioner. A family friend, Jack Wasserman, took her up in a plane and pointed out 3 huge streams of pollution and told her, "My sources tell me the lake will be dead in 10 years. You're a parks commissioner, Doreen. Do something." She did. Doreen Lawson ran for alderman and spent the next 25 years saving Burnaby Lake not once but thrice. At her death, we poured her ashes in the lake she loved so well. Then hundreds of ducks began rising in the air, flapping their wings in unison as though they knew their champion had died. Mom was a perfectly ordinary Burnaby housewife who had a 32 duck salute. I, too, was a perfectly ordinary, though disabled, freelance writer, Fibro, who made a living when only 10% of Canadian writers do, and I had 0 training in writing. I'd been an actor and stand-up comic. Then a recession hit, the internet began, and the magazine industry croaked. Wow. Needless to say, I developed insomnia, for which a lazy-ass shrink pushed benzos on me. Benzos. Ah, those nice, ordinary, and safe sleeping pills like clonazepam, Valium, Xanax, which disabled me for 20 years. Which is surprisingly ordinary, as French studies show 75% of people who take them are harmed or disabled. If you quit too rapidly after taking them for decades, they can cause clinical depression, homicidality, psychosis, and hallucinations. I had the nice, ordinary hallucinations. I was clean and sober and going to NAAA. One day, the most beautiful man I have ever seen in my entire life wafts through my front door, naked, and says, "I have come to bring you to your destiny. You came to the United States to bring me to mine in our shared last life. I was supposed to do that for you, but I was killed. But they let me come looking as I did in our last life to remind you of who you really are." He claimed to be Louis Riel and said I'd been Gabrielle Dumont. Wow, broke back batosh. With a line like that, needless to say, we had a mad, passionate, hallucinatory affair. Then he told me there was a man with a piece of his soul in this life who would look just like him and would come to me. Then one day a perfectly ordinary thing happened. A Louis lookalike walked through my front door and began interrogating me. Okay, it was the Canadian census guy to finish filling out the long-form census. It should only have taken 10 minutes and we talked for over 2 hours. He smiled at me with a Louis smile, laughed at all my stories, had a full head of gray hair, but was Louis to the life if he'd lived to be my age. I assumed magical things would work out, well, magically, but when we finished, as I told my baby sister, I let him walk out the door. Now, baby sister led a nice ordinary life, is a computer techie for a bank, acquiring a perfectly ordinary husband with 2 kids, and is now a great mom and grandmom. She said, affronted, "Lynn, you missed the obvious thing to do." "What's that, Lise?" "You forgot the drug chocolate." Silly me. Now I have 2 adorable, perfectly ordinary grandnieces and 1 grandnephew, Sawyer, Hattie, and Henry. Given their grandma, grandpa, and relies, however, they may well become tiny homicidal maniacs, or simply conquer the world. Now me, if I see that Louis look-alike again, I'm bopping him on the head and tying him to the bed, in my perfectly ordinary Canadian family way. Or just asking him for coffee. I don't always have to be ordinary.
Normally I pride myself on sharing carefully crafted stories on this stage. Carefully crafted stories with complex metaphors and poetic language, but tonight, I'm going to tell you about something that's true. Something that's gone on out where we live, out in Langley, because the media isn't talking about it. And I think you have a right to hear about it. It is true. It is part of a national security investigation, and you need to hear about this. Langley is a capital C conservative town with too many big pickup trucks and not enough cultural diversity. Within the Langley Township Fire Department is a district fire chief who is very outspoken about his controversial political views. There have been many complaints about him assimilating his firefighters into adopting his weird beliefs. He wears button pins on his jacket with odd symbols and political slogans. To say that he is well known within our community is an understatement. One day, at the end of a shift in the fire department, one of the firefighters notices a particular button pin on his chief's jacket. It's written in some strange language. "What does that say?" he asks. The chief tells him. The firefighter grins. The chief gives him the button pin. The firefighter clips it to his jacket and leaves to pick up his wife from work. The firefighter's wife is a police officer. While the firefighter waits for his wife to get off work, another police detective notices the pin and asks what it says. The firefighter, being as much of a shit disturber as his boss, just says, it's just some Arabic writing, don't worry about it. "Where'd you get it from?" "My chief gave it to me." The detective covertly takes a photo with his phone. The detective goes to his boss, the police chief's office, and closes the door behind him. "Sir, I just saw Detective Carson's husband, who, as you know, is a firefighter, wearing this button pin. He said it was given to him by Fire Chief Ross." Chief Ross. What does it say? I asked him, but he wouldn't tell me. The 2 men peer suspiciously at the pin, but they can't make heads or tails of the intricate foreign writing. This must be investigated. On the advice of the police chief, the detective sends the photo up the RCMP chain of command until it reaches their official translation department. A reply comes back. "This is just some words written in Arabic. It is not a matter for you to concern yourself with." The detective responds, "Yes, but what does it mean?" He receives another dismissive reply. The email conversation goes back and forth several times, but each time he receives no further information. What is going on here? The district fire chief, who is notorious for having controversial political views, is giving these pins to his firefighters with something written on it in a brown language, and the RCMP translator is refusing to say what it means. What is going on in my town? 9/11? Illegal immigration? Al-Qaeda? Both the fire department and the provincial police force are somehow involved in this shitstorm. How deep has this corruption infiltrated our system? On the advice of the chief, the detective contacts CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. He sends them the photo and the whole story, emphasizing the involvement of both the fire department and the police force. CSIS forwards the email to the Department of National Defense's Anti-Terrorism Branch. The detective receives a reply. Don't worry about it. This is just some Arabic writing. This is bigger than any of us could ever have imagined. There is no higher authority in the country that this detective can escalate the situation to. This is huge, and he has to tell someone. But who? As producer of this show, it is my responsibility to be upfront and honest about who is involved in this event so that you can make an informed decision about whether you want to participate. Your MC, Mr. Brian Ross, is a district fire chief who is the black sheep of the Langley Fire Department. He is notorious for imposing bizarre and controversial ideas on his firefighters, such as using non-gendered pronouns in official documents, treating female firefighters with respect, addressing trans folk by their proper names, eliminating racist jokes from office banter. How dare he? One of his hobbies is making button pins with funny cartoons and quotes about human rights and giving them away to anybody who wants one. So he came up with an idea for one pin that he wanted translated into another language. So he texted the phrase to a Kurdish friend of ours and asked her to translate it into the beautiful script of Arabic writing. He carefully copied the translation onto a pin, stuck it onto his jacket, and off to work he went. Where one of his firefighters asked him, "What's that say?" Ellipses. A few days later, on the other side of town, a frantic and furious police detective sends a photo of that pin to CSIS, who forwards it to the Department of National Defense's Anti-Terrorism Branch. The detective receives a reply. Don't worry about it, this is just some Arabic writing. The terrified detective is mind blown. How thick is this web of corruption and infiltration? He has to tell someone, but who? In desperation, he replies to that email and copies it to every high-ranking political official he can think of. This is a matter of national security. Please provide a word-for-word translation of the attached photo. The Department of National Defense replies. The translation of the message on the pin is, quote, "Don't worry about it. This is just some Arabic writing." Unquote. Enjoy the show.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Susan. I want to tell you a story about the most insane person that I know in my life, and for some odd reason, he's also my favorite person. He's only 5'4" tall, but he's got these big, broad shoulders that the way he speaks, it's a very deep, baritone voice. And for some reason, he can always command the room when he enters it. And this insane, crazy person has an incredible story that I want to share with you. So way back in the 1990s, and it was, we were in India. This person is actually my dad. And when he was young, he's an old man now, but when he was young, he had this really thick black mustache. It's the same kind of mustache that all Indian men wear. And when he was young, he would sail across the world in an oil tanker from coast to coast, because he was a chief engineer on these boats. And most of the time he would travel by himself, but on one occasion, he decided to take myself, my mom, and my brother with him. And sailing across this massive ocean, Great Indian Ocean, is, it's always getting pelted by typhoons. We're in this massive oil tanker carrying 30,000 metric tons of pollutant crude oil, and we're stuffed in a cabin full of 40 men, sailors. And I think to myself, wow, this is like the perfect summer vacation. And I was with my dad. I was with as a 7-year-old, who better to be with? Anyways, on one of these trips, we were a couple days out into the ocean, and the captain of the ship comes into our cabin and addresses my dad. And the captain goes, "Joes, we have a problem. There's a typhoon coming, and I don't know what to do. I need your advice." The captain's also from India, by the way. He asks my dad for advice, and he says, "Joes, do we ground the ship, or do we face the storm head on?" Now, for those of you that don't know, grounding the ship basically means turning the ship against the side of the storm so that it would blow into the coast. It basically means allowing the ship to crash into the coast and spilling all that crude oil into the lush tropical rainforest and the coastline of India. We were carrying 30,000 tons of crude oil. That's, for comparison's sake, the Exxon Valdez was 37,000 metric tons. It would have been a catastrophe. But on the other hand, if we stayed to fight the storm, the captain was essentially trying to say, is the life of the people on board, including my life, was worth the risk? And my dad, being that baritone voice, he just looks up at the captain and says, "It's okay, Captain. Hold steady, have faith, the engine can manage." And he just gives the captain a little bit of extra courage. And the captain doesn't look all that much relieved. He just looks grumpy. And he goes back up to the bridge, and my dad and I look out into the horizon from our cabin, and we can see dark clouds forming. Slowly, the wind is starting to pick up. I can see the water's getting a little bit more choppy. And then the captain, it goes on like this for a little while, and eventually the captain comes back after a few hours. This time he looks really wrecked. He goes up to my dad, "Joes, are you sure? It's not too late to ground the ship. We can still ground it. What do you think?" And my dad looks up at the captain and says, "It's okay, Joe. We can manage. The engine can manage. Hold steady." And then my dad puts on his overalls, goes downstairs to the engine room to be with his crew. And I don't see him for the next 24 hours. But then I look out at the cabin window and I can see the storm. The waves are 10 meters tall. They're like mountains rocking our boat. I can hear the metal creaking of this massive oil tanker, and next to the ocean we're nothing but a speck. The storm sounds like wolves fighting outside, and I'm sitting in my cabin eating my chicken wings thinking this is the greatest adventure of my life. My brother and my mom look terrified. I think they might throw up. Everything that's not like sticking to the ground is flying, including my bigger brother. Then I see the storm picking up a little bit more, and the front of the boat tips over a huge wave, and we come crashing down, spraying all this water everywhere. I can even smell the salt in the air. It was insane. As we go down through the storm, into the eye of the storm, the captain calls my dad again, and he's completely destroyed. I've never seen this grown man look so terrified. And my dad, he gives him the courage to hold steady once again. Eventually, though, the storm does pass. It took 24 hours. I woke up the next day, and the ocean was calm. My dad comes into the cabin, and he looks completely exhausted. I've never seen him so tired. But he comes over and gives my mom, my brother, and myself a big hug, and he looks so relieved. Then the captain comes into our cabin again, and he looks happy. And he goes up to my dad and says, "Joes, for as long as I live, I will never forget what you did today. You saved our life." And then he comes over to me, puts a hand on my shoulder, and he says, "Son, your father's a real hero." And I look at my dad, and his eyes are dancing. His big black mustache is wiggling with joy. He seems so happy. The happiest I've ever seen him. But he gave up that life a long time ago. In fact, he retired after that trip. And we immigrated to Canada. And he donned a different uniform. Nowadays, he wears a uniform for TransLink. Maybe you've seen him around. He helps you get to work day to day, helping you with your daily commute. Maybe you've heard his thick Indian accent. Maybe you've seen his thick Indian mustache, I don't know. But to me, I just want to remind everybody that heroes don't always wear capes. Usually they wear a uniform, and they're just trying to feed their family. Thank you.